Does the gear that you use matter? Yeah. Also, not at all. Maybe it's a different question. Maybe it's when does gear matter? Let's talk about it. So once upon a time, I was in this band. I was like 18 years old, and we had recorded in this big, fancy studio, and it had one of those really big SSL consoles with all the knobs and switches and faders and buttons, and it had all this outboard gear with more knobs and switches and buttons, and it was just so much fun, right? And we recorded drums and bass at the same time, got it locked in together. We recorded grand piano, and then we promptly ran out of money. We were like 18-year-old kids. Like, we didn't know you needed more than 3 days in the studio to make a record. But at the time, we were like kind of freaking out because we were like, how do we finish this record? And I was like, fret not, bandmates. I have this new product that I just purchased. It's called a FirePod. We can record the rest of everything at my home studio. So we did. I honestly fell in love with the process of home recording and this like trial and error, which is like, we had no pressure, right? I could noodle into the late hours of the night without worrying about the budget that we didn't have, or, it was just, we could try stuff. It was just so freeing to be able to do this at home, and we loved it, and we captured these great performances. But when I listened to those tracks, it was weird. Like, all the drums and the bass and the piano was like up front and big and huge sounding and competitive with other stuff in the genre at that time. But all the stuff that we had recorded at my home studio, it was like cold and distant, and it just sounded like it was over there. The drummer at the time actually had the best like metaphor for it. He's like, it's as if like the drums and the bass and the piano are like this karaoke track, and you're just recording on top of this karaoke track. And I was like, yeah, that's kind of crazy, but it makes sense, right? And so I talked to a friend of mine that was in recording school at that time, and I was like, hey, this is what's happening. This is the experience that we're having. What's going on? Like, am I using the wrong mic? And he's like, no. When you go to those studios, they have these preamps that have these transformers in them, and when you turn it up, it saturates the transformer, and it really brings it forward in the mix and makes it sound big. It's not necessarily 100% true, but I took it as 100% truth at the time. So we go out, we buy. At the time, there wasn't a lot of companies doing this. Warm Audio didn't exist yet. Black Lion Audio wasn't out yet. There was a brand called Golden Age Project, and they made a 1073, a Neve 1073 clone with like budget parts. And so if you wanted that transformer sound, you could have it without paying the thousands of dollars that it would cost you to get a Neve. So we bought it and started tracking stuff again, and it sounded better, but not great. It was still like a little distant, but it was warmer this time. Like, I could tell that the transformer was doing something, but it was like, I got the character, but it still sounded far and distant. Stick with me. This is where it kind of comes full circle. So I go back to the same guy, and I was like, hey, so we bought one of these. This is now the experience that we're having. And he goes, yeah, that makes total sense, because Golden Age, they are, making budget stuff so that you can try out, this type of thing without spending the money, but like, they're making it with a lot of budget components. It's just not going to sound as good. I was like, okay. So I returned it. And because it only cost like $300 at the time or something like that, I returned it, and I then started looking around for a preamp that was a big preamp. Like, I couldn't afford a Neve or an API or, a Grace Design or anything like that at the time. Like, I had very little money. So I sold a couple guitar pedals. I returned that preamp and ended up picking up a Universal Audio 710 Twinfinity. This is not a plugin. This is a hardware preamp. I need to be clear about that. And this preamp had this like switch in the middle, or this knob where you could go 100% tube or 100% transformer on the other way. And I was like, okay, so there's some versatility in it. And so I bought it, hooked it up into the studio, hardwired it straight into the line input of the FirePod because I didn't have a patch bay or anything. and started recording guitars. And sure enough, everything just started gluing into the mix that I was recording through this preamp. And like the bass overdub that we wanted to make, we were able to make, and it actually glued right into place. And recorded vocals. And even though that's not my favorite preamp for vocals, like it glued into the mix. Like it was great. And all the other stuff. And this was such an interesting experience because I realized that, is there an audible difference? Yes. And I want to stop anybody right now that's currently like in the process of Googling, like, how much does a Universal Audio 710 cost? Because the point of that story is, believe it or not to sell you a piece of equipment. It's not the one thing that's going to transform your music career by any means, right? But there's a baseline that we all need to have, which is you can record a hit song using a Focusrite 2i2 and an AT2020, like a cheap $100 condenser mic. If you need proof.
Like the first mic we ever used was called an AT2020, which was what we did Ocean Eyes and a couple of our other songs on it. It was like $80.
And like me, as someone who is just a fan of good music and good art, I am always and forever going to be more excited about that kid that's in a basement who's recording on whatever he can afford, because he's got to get his record out there by any means necessary. And arguably, I'm more excited about that kid than I am about the kid who's in that multi-million-dollar studio that has access to all the best gear in the world, right? There is a difference between saying something and having something to say. And whenever somebody brings that up in a conversation that's about gear, I always think to myself, that is entirely true and something we should all keep in mind, but it's not what we're talking about. Yes, it helps to thwart off pretentiousness, and I don't want anyone to feel lesser than because they don't have expensive equipment. Like, this is an inclusive thing. This is music. This is a human experience, and it should not have a paywall. But there's this other side to it. And I think about that kid who is like recording through his inexpensive microphone, like the Rode NT1, the AT2020, and it's going into his Focusrite or his inexpensive interface. And he's like, you know what? I've got the mic position down. I'm getting the performance that I want. Like, why is this not sounding as good as some of my favorite records? Like if he's chasing that sound, right? And there's a certain element to where it's like, yeah, if you don't have a $2,000 microphone that's going into a $2,000 preamp, into a $2,000 compressor, into $2,000 converters, yeah, you're going to come up a little short. There is an audible difference. And that's not just me saying that. Like, let me introduce you to this gentleman. His name is Philip Odom. He has worked on projects like Say Anything, Anthony Green, Me Without You, more recently, Military Gun. Phenomenal producer.
I just want to say I started on the $100 microphone with the $100 interface. And over 10 years, I have upgraded to all of this for a reason. And that's because the $100 microphone and the $100 interface does not sound as good as this. And if it did, I would have stayed on the $100 microphone. But it doesn't. And there is an audible difference. And when you get to a certain level, you have to start caring about that.
A number of years ago, I was actually assisting on a session for a friend of mine. He's this singer-songwriter. And he was like, you know what? I want to make a record that sounds like a Cat Stevens record, like from the 70s. And I was like, that's interesting. I had been taught mostly just modern recording techniques. I'd worked with a lot of punk and indie and metal and emo bands and stuff like that. And so I could get stuff that sounded like that modern, right? I didn't know anything about the 70s or the techniques that were used or anything like that. And he was like, I wanted to have some smoke and vibe and sauce. And I was like, okie dokie. The head engineer, thank God he was there, was making choices based on that. And I remember like thinking about it, going like, that seems crazy. Like, we had access to really great mics and preamps and everything, right? So even though we could have grabbed the Neumann KM84s, which are really expensive small diaphragm condensers, sound beautiful on acoustic guitar, instead of that, he chose an SM57. $100 dynamic microphone that most likely most of us have in a closet somewhere. And I was like, that seems nuts for an acoustic guitar. And instead of sending that into the console, he actually sent it to this outboard preamp that was like this old tube preamp. And he was like, it's like a no-name brand. I don't know what it sounds like. It's never worked for anything before, but let's try it for this. And we plugged it in and heard it. And we were like, wow, yeah, that's given us that kind of sound. And then instead of sending it to one of the more modern compressors, he actually compressed it on the way in, and he compressed it to hell, and like got like the string articulation on that thing to really just sing and chime. And it was like kind of the choked high end of the SM57 with like the EQ just caused those strings to ring out in such a beautiful way on the top end. And instead of sending that to Pro Tools, he chose to send it to a tape machine, but not even the good tape machine. They had a good tape machine. They had an Otari MTR90, which is a 24-track, 2-inch machine. They sent it to this shitty old Fostex, which is 1/4 inch of tape for 8 tracks. If you don't know anything about tape and fidelity, the more space that you have on the tape for the amount of tracks, the more fidelity you have. So less space, you get lower fidelity, lo-fi. And I remember like hearing the end product of that and just going like, wow, that is a sound that almost no one knows how to get anymore. And we were able to get it. And that's when I realized another valuable lesson, which is, does the gear matter? Yeah, sometimes. Other times, not at all. What are you going for? What are you trying to accomplish? Can you use the tools of your trade to help you get the sounds that complete the picture of the record that you're trying to make? You know how this goes. If you got something out of this video, please press the buttons, hit the like, give me a subscription if you got some value out of this. A lot of stuff coming up on this channel. These speakers were actually sent to me by Aventone Pro. I can't wait to do the review on them. I'm still in the process of getting to learn them, but I'm going to compare them to the Neumann monitors that I've got up here, which are like 4 times the price. So that's going to be coming up. That's going to be super interesting. Also, just want to point out, this is kind of funny. I've got a hole in the wall. This is why I don't always like to shoot facing this direction. And then that little white thing, that's not like an acoustic panel. That's my daughter's crib mattress. Whenever she outgrew it and we got her like a big girl bed, I was like, that is some dense material. That might work as a bass trap. And it actually does. It works great. So if you can't afford like acoustic panels and treatment and stuff, because that stuff gets crazy pricey, crib mattress maybe might work. All right, see you in the next one.